My name is Gerald Whitfield. I am 69 years old, and I am a retired architect. To my only son, Deshaun, I am just a simple old man, a burden he has to take care of in my old age. He and his new wealthy in-laws certainly thought so. I know this because I came home a day early from my trip. I found my wife Loretta crying all alone in our living room, but from the kitchen I could hear my son laughing. He was laughing loudly with his in-laws as they measured my walls, planning to move me and my wife down into the basement. They thought I was finished. They thought I was powerless. They didn't know that the simple old man they were trying to throw away was secretly a multimillionaire, and they didn't know that I had already set the trap for them. The flight out of Dallas had been smooth. I had chosen not to call ahead. At 69, chances to truly surprise the woman you've spent 45 years loving don't come around often. I let myself imagine Loretta's face, that unhurried smile that still had a way of squeezing my heart. I slipped my key into the lock. The house was still. Welcome back to Honor Revenge Stories, where the truth has a way of arriving right on time. Before we get into it, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop one word in the comments that captures where your head is right now. One word. That's all. This story touches something real about family pride and what we owe the people who built us. A quick note. Some details in this story have been shaped for the telling, and any resemblance to real individuals is purely coincidental. What matters is the message at the heart of it. Too quiet. Loretta, I called out, setting my carry-on down in the foyer. I'm home, baby. The only answer was a muffled sound drifting from the living room. I walked in, and my good mood vanished. Loretta was curled up on the sofa, the one we'd picked out together back in 1984. Her shoulders were heaving. She was crying a deep, gutting kind of sob that went straight through me. Loretta, honey, what is it? What's wrong? She startled, jumping at the sound of my voice. Her eyes were red and swollen. Gerald, you're not supposed to be home until tomorrow. I caught an earlier flight. What happened? Did someone hurt you? She shook her head, working to wipe her face. They're here, Gerald. In the kitchen. I went still. As she said it, another sound broke through the quiet of the house. Laughter, coming from my kitchen. It was my son Deshaun, but he wasn't alone. I recognized the sharp, aristocratic laugh of his mother-in-law, Sylvette Langford. Who's here? I asked, even though my gut already had the answer. Deshaun, Loretta whispered as though she were afraid to say the names aloud. And Candace and her parents, they showed up about an hour ago. They're measuring. The word landed wrong. I left Loretta on the sofa and moved down the hall. The laughter grew louder with every step. They were relaxed. They were enjoying themselves. While my wife sat crying 20 feet away, I stopped in the doorway of my own kitchen. What I saw felt like a knife in the chest. Deshaun, my son, had one end of a laser distance meter in his hand. His wife Candace was scribbling on a notepad, and her parents Clifford and Sylvette Langford were posted up near my refrigerator, helping themselves to what looked like my good bourbon. I'm telling you, Clifford, Sylvette said, swirling her glass. This entire wall has to go. We knock it out and put a massive Carrara marble island right here. Clifford Langford, a man who always carried an expression like he'd just caught a bad smell, nodded along. Good bones, but everything else is dated. Look at this cabinetry. Cherry wood. Pathetic, Candace laughed. I know, Daddy, it's awful, but once we get the new appliances in, it'll be fabulous, won't it? Deshaun, my son, my 38-year-old son, just nodded, his eyes lit up with a greedy gleam I had never once seen in him before. It's going to be amazing, honey. Absolutely amazing. Deshaun! My voice cut across the room like a blade. Deshaun dropped the laser distance meter. It struck the tile floor with a hard clatter. Dad! He went pale. Dad, what are you doing home? Your flight was tomorrow. I live here, I said, keeping my voice dangerously level. A better question is, what are you doing? And why is your mother crying in the living room? The Langfords turned to look at me. There was no surprise in their faces. No shame either. Just irritation, as though I were a staff member who had wandered in at the wrong moment. Oh, Gerald, you're back, Sylvette said, taking a measured sip of my bourbon. Don't be dramatic. Loretta is just being emotional. We're only planning the remodel. My remodel, I said. Candace stepped forward. She was a tall, angular woman, and her personality was every bit as sharp as her wardrobe. She set one hand on her hip. Yes, Dad, we're telling you now. Deshaun and I are moving in. I looked at Deshaun. He wouldn't look back at me. He was studying the floor like a boy caught red-handed. Moving in? Of course. Candace said, her tone patient in the way people are patient with someone they think is slow. Our apartment is lovely, but it's a rental. This house, well, it's going to be Deshawn's eventually anyway. We might as well start making it ours now. It's just practical. I couldn't find words. I looked at the cherry wood cabinetry that Roscoe, my father, had helped me put in. I looked at the floor tiles Loretta and I had laid ourselves over a long weekend back in '92. Candace kept going, oblivious. We'll take the master bedroom. Of course it has the ensuite. She gestured loosely toward the hallway. You and Loretta can move your things down to the guest room in the basement. It's perfectly comfortable. And honestly, at your age, you don't really need all that space, do you? It'll be more convenient for everyone. The basement. They intended to move me into my own basement. I felt the blood drain from my face. I had designed this house. I had drawn every blueprint myself. I had driven nails alongside the construction crew. This was not simply a house. It was the work of my life. And they were discussing it like a piece of furniture they could rearrange on a whim. Get out. The words were quiet, but they had weight. Candace actually laughed. Excuse me, what did you say? I repeated louder, now get out of my house. Clifford Langford, who had been holding back, stepped forward. He was the kind of man built for authority, ran a hedge fund, looked down at everyone from a great height. Now, see here, Gerald, let's not act like children. We are family, and we are working out a practical solution to your situation. Your situation, Sylvette chimed in, setting her glass down. Your age, your limited income. Deshawn has been very open with us about his finances. We know how much he has to help you out every month. That hit me like a fist to the stomach. Deshawn helped me. I had never taken a single dime from my son, not one. We think it's admirable, Sylvette continued, her voice thick with manufactured sympathy. But it is a burden, and now that he's married to Candace, we are his family too. We've decided to shoulder that burden. We're going to take over this house, handle the bills, handle the maintenance. And in return, Clifford added, you and Loretta get a safe place to live downstairs. It's more than fair. I turned to my son. He was still staring at the floor. His silence was his confession. Deshawn? He flinched. Look at me. Slowly his eyes came up to meet mine. They were full of shame, guilt, and something uglier than both. Weakness. Your wife is crying, I said, my voice trembling with a rage so deep it frightened me. These people who I have never invited into my home are drinking my liquor and carving up my house like it's spoils of war. Tell them to leave. Tell them, Deshawn, now. This was the moment my son would rise to his feet and be the man I had raised him to be. Deshawn looked at me, then at Candace, then at her wealthy, powerful parents. And then he folded. Hey, Dad, just listen, he said, desperation in his voice. Just stop making a scene. You're embarrassing me. Embarrassing him. They're right, Dad. The words spilled out in a rush. This house is too much for you. We can help. You're not getting any younger. We worry about you and Mom all the time. This is the best way. The best way, I whispered, to put me out of my own bedroom. Dad, stop. He finally raised his voice, face flushed red. Just stop it. I am tired of this. Tired of worrying about this old house. Tired of worrying about your bills. Tired of everyone pretending we're not all just waiting. This is my house now. Or it will be. Candace and I are making the decisions. Just accept it. And just like that, the rage was gone. Not slowly, it simply left. In its place came a cold, crystalline quiet inside my head. Everything sharpened. I looked at my son not as the boy I had raised, but as a 38-year-old stranger, a man who had just confirmed my deepest and darkest fears. I looked at his wife Candace wearing a smug smile of victory. I looked at her parents regarding me with the detached pity of people watching an old lion pace its enclosure. The son I had known was gone. I see, I said. My voice was perfectly even. I gave a slow nod. Then I turned my back on all of them. I walked out of the kitchen past my son, who looked thrown off by my silence. I moved back into the living room, where Loretta was still on the sofa, watching me with terrified, hopeful eyes. Well, Jerry, what's happening? I didn't stop. I went to the coat closet. I took out her winter coat. I walked back to her and held it open. Get your coat, Loretta. What? She sniffled. Gerald, what are you doing? We're leaving, I said. My voice was calm. It was the calm of a general who has surveyed the whole battlefield and knows precisely where to strike. Deshawn and the others had followed me into the living room. What are you talking about, Dad? Deshawn asked, his tone split between confusion and irritation. Where are you going? You can't just leave. I helped Loretta to her feet, guiding her arms into the sleeves of her coat. She looked up at me, her eyes full of questions she wasn't asking, but she trusted me. She always had. I picked up her small purse from the table. Then I turned to face my son. I looked at him, at his wife, at her parents. You said you were taking over, I told them. You said you were making the decisions now. And I walked toward the front door. Then have it, I said, swinging the door wide. Every last bit of it. I steered Loretta out onto the porch into the cold dark, then turned and shut the door behind me. The latch clicked. Small sound. Final sound. One chapter sealed, shut another cracked open. No taxi. I pulled up the black car service on my phone. A dark, spotless Cadillac Escalade was at the curb in under 2 minutes. Loretta stood shaking at my side, cold air or shock or both. I couldn't separate one from the other. She looked the car over, then looked at me. Gerald, what is this? Where are we headed? Somewhere they can't touch us, Loretta. Get in. The driver came around and held her door. I leaned forward and gave him the address, the Ritz-Carlton downtown. Loretta didn't say a word the whole way there. She kept her face turned toward the glass, and in her reflection I could see the dried tracks of tears still marking her cheeks. When the car swept under the portico and the hotel blazed into view, she stiffened. Jerry, no, she whispered, her voice barely holding. A place like this has to run $500 a night. We can't afford this. We're fine, honey, I said, and held her hand firm. I led her straight to the front desk. The night manager glanced up, and his practice-polished smile gave way to something genuine. Mr. Whitfield, what an honor, sir. We had no word you were coming. Spur of the moment, Franklin, I told him. I'll need the presidential suite tonight. Absolutely, sir. Follow me. Your luggage will be brought right up. Loretta's hand found my arm, her fingers pressing in hard. Gerald, Mr. Whitfield, presidential suite. I gave her hand a quiet squeeze. Upstairs first, then I'll explain everything, I promise. The suite stopped her cold. It was bigger than our entire ground floor at home. The windows ran floor to ceiling, curving around the room, and below us, the city burned and glittered, like something thrown from a great height. Loretta drifted to the middle of the room and stood there. She reached out and touched a marble side table, testing it as if the whole place might dissolve. Gerald, her voice was fraying at the edges. I'm scared. What is going on? How do these people know who you are? I draped my coat over a chair, then settled her onto a velvet sofa that had probably cost more than our old car. Loretta, I need a few minutes of quiet from you. There's a call I have to make, the most important one I've made in years. I took out my phone. My hands didn't shake. The fury from the house had burned everything away and left only something cold and precise. I dialed from memory a number I hadn't used in nearly a year. It rang twice. Harlan Beaumont. Harlan, it's Gerald Whitfield. A sharp breath on the other end. Gerald, do you realize it's 3 Uzarid in the morning here? This has to mean. It's time, Harlan. Silence stretched across the line like a held breath. You're certain? His voice went flat and professional. You understand what you're setting in motion. Clause 7B is the nuclear button. Once triggered, there's no walking it back. It means Deshawn will be? I'm certain, I said. He stood in my kitchen tonight while his wife's family carved my house into pieces and moved my wife to tears. He made his choice. I wanted activated. Cut him off by morning. It's done, Harlan said. I need you and Loretta in my office first thing. 9 a.m. sharp. My team will have everything laid out. We'll be there. I ended the call. Loretta was watching me from the sofa, her eyes wide with fear and a confusion she couldn't quite name. Clause 7B. Who's being cut off, Jerry? You're scaring me. Who is Harlan? I pulled a chair close and sat facing her. 40 years I had carried this. I told myself it was to shield her. Sitting there, I saw clearly how wrong that had been. I'd shielded her right into helplessness. She deserved the truth. She had deserved it for a very long time. Harlan Beaumont. I said, is my attorney, my real one, not the local fellow who does our taxes every spring. Harlan oversees my entire estate. Your estate. The words sat in the air. Loretta. I said, taking her cold hands between mine. I haven't been honest with you. Not with you and not with Deshawn. Not for a very, very long time. Then I told her all of it. The architectural firm. How retiring at 55 hadn't meant what she thought it meant. I hadn't walked away, I had sold. sold the firm, and more crucially sold my entire portfolio of structural design patents to an international conglomerate. It wasn't just enough to live on, I said, and the old deception tasted like ash leaving my mouth. It was far, far more than that. How much, Jerry? The question came out barely above a breath. The sale came to $24 million. After taxes, I put $20 million into a blind trust, the Whitfield Family Trust. Loretta made a small, strangled sound. 20 million. And it didn't stay there. Harlan grew it. We're sitting closer to 35 million today. But why? She pulled her hands free, and what came out wasn't joy. It was the sound of someone realizing the ground under them had never been what they thought. Why would you keep this from me? The tight budgets, the old car, Deshawn, all of it. Why? Because of Deshawn, I said. The grief of it settled over me like something heavy. I watched money hollow out my partner's children. It bred entitlement, softness, a kind of bone-deep weakness I couldn't stand to see. I was not going to hand that to my son. I wanted him earning his own way, understanding what things cost, standing on his own 2 feet, not coasting on an inheritance. So you pretended to be poor. I lived within limits, I said carefully. Everything he truly needed he had. The trust covered his college. It covered the deposit on his first place. I just told him it was the last of my savings. I honestly believed that was the right way to build character. I got up and moved to the window. The city spread out below, indifferent and glittering. But I had it wrong. I wasn't building character. I was just concealing the target. I let him think I was feeble, that I was simple, that I was a weight he had to drag, and he took it as truth. Loretta sat quiet for a long moment, working through it 20 years of a life that now looked different in every direction, trying to place the man she thought she knew inside this hotel room that apparently was his natural habitat. The house, she said at last, her voice gone small. The one they were pacing out with their measuring tools. The one they mean to take. I turned to face her. That's the part that matters most, Loretta. That house doesn't belong to us. It never did. What are you telling me? I'm telling you, I said, and felt something cold and satisfying click into place. It belongs to the trust. We're the lifelong occupants, nothing more. And Deshawn just made the mistake of trying to evict the people who hold the deed. Morning came. Loretta and I walked into Harlan Beaumont's offices, her still wearing yesterday's clothes, her eyes red-rimmed and puffy. I, by contrast, had been on the phone with the hotel concierge at 6:00 a.m. A new 2,000 $2,000 midnight navy suit had arrived at my door within the hour. When I came out of the bedroom, dressed Loretta stared at me. In 45 years, she had never once seen me in anything that wasn't pulled off a department store rack. She was at last beginning to meet the man she had actually married. Harlan's firm bore no resemblance to the modest offices she was used to seeing. It occupied the 45th floor of the Fountain Place Tower, a vast open space of rich dark wood, soaring glass, and serious abstract art. The receptionist didn't ask who we were. She rose the moment we stepped through the door. "Mr. Whitfield, Mr. Beaumont is ready for you in the main conference room." Loretta tightened her grip on my hand. None of this world had ever been visible to her. The conference room held a 20-foot mahogany table. Harlan waited at the far end with the whole Dallas skyline laid out behind him. On the phone, he was efficient and calm. In person, dressed in a crisp pinstripe suit, he was something more, a man who radiated the particular authority of someone who has never once doubted his own power. "Good morning, Gerald Loretta," he said, directing us to our seats. "The circumstances are unfortunate, and I'm sorry for them. But I'm glad you finally come. There's considerable ground to cover, and not much time." "Harlan talked to me," Loretta said quietly. Gerald explained about the trust, but Deshawn's behavior last night, it wasn't just about the house, was it? "No, Loretta, it wasn't," Harlan said, and his face was grave. He pushed a thick spiral-bound report across the table toward me. The moment Gerald raised the possibility of triggering Clause 7B, I put my investigators to work. What played out in your home last night had nothing to do with disrespect. It was desperation, plain and complete. I opened the report. The first page laid out my son's financial picture in full. The color drained from my face. "My God," I breathed. "Gerald, what is it?" Loretta leaned toward me. I had no words. I simply rotated the report so she could read the figure at the bottom of the page herself. What is $750,000? She asked. That, Harlan said, is the total debt your son Deshaun and his wife Candace are currently carrying. As that can't be right, Loretta said. Deshaun has a real career. He's a marketing director. He earns good money. He told us he makes $150,000 a year, Harlan cut in, which is a solid income. The trouble is, his wife Candace spends $300,000 a year. He clicked a remote. The screen on the wall came alive, a cascade of spreadsheets, credit card statements. Nordstrom, Neiman, Marcus. A lease payment for a new Porsche Cayenne that Candace was driving, mortgage payments on a condo well beyond their means. They are living a complete fiction. I said, the picture snapping into focus. A suffocating one. But the Langfords, Loretta said. Candace's parents, they're wealthy. Aren't they helping? That's the cruelest part, Harlan said, advancing to the next slide. The Langfords have money, yes, but they guard it. They believe in looking prosperous, not in subsidizing it. They expect Deshaun as the husband to maintain that standard himself. And Deshaun, trying desperately to meet that expectation, has been going under. Personal loans, 22 maxed out credit cards. He is on the edge of losing everything. I stared at the figures, the trips to Vail, the jewelry receipts. That's why they were measuring my kitchen, I said. They need whatever my house would fetch. They need it now. It's worse than that, Gerald, Harlan said. His voice dropped, and the room seemed to drop in temperature with it. What they did last night, that wasn't their first plan. That was their fallback. Their fallback? Loretta breathed. Harlan looked at me steadily. Gerald, I held this back unless it became unavoidable. But 3 months ago, I received a call from the senior manager at the bank that administers the Whitfield Trust. He advanced to a new document, a scanned email printed and flagged. 3 months ago, Deshaun Whitfield and his father-in-law, Clifford Langford, arranged a private meeting at that bank. They brought their own legal counsel. They petitioned to have the trust's assets frozen. I pushed back from the table and stood. They did what? They attempted to have you, Gerald declared, legally mentally incompetent. Loretta's hand flew to her mouth in a small, horrified sound. They assembled a file. Harlan continued. Anecdotal evidence how you misplace things, how you live beneath your means, which they cited as a sign of senile hoarding, how you supposedly let your finances fall into neglect and disarray. We chose to live simply, Loretta said. That was our decision, and they tried to turn that decision into a weapon, Harlan said. They argued that Gerald's refusal to live a life of luxury was proof that he was no longer sound of mind. They wanted the bank to grant Deshaun emergency signatory authority over the trust to protect his father's assets, they said. What they actually wanted was the $35 million. They wanted it all, I said. The ice in my chest spread outward. All of it, Harlan confirmed. The bank naturally showed them the door. The trust is airtight, built specifically to withstand exactly this kind of maneuver. The manager knows you personally, Gerald. He recognized it as a fraudulent claim on the spot, and per the trust's security protocol, he telephoned me the same day. I lowered myself back into the chair. The weight of it settled over me like something solid. This was not a greedy son angling for a bigger inheritance. This was deliberate, calculated. My own child had tried to have my mind legally erased so he could walk away with everything. So last night, Loretta said, fitting the final piece into place was Plan B. Exactly, I said. When the trust proved untouchable, they went after the one thing they believed I actually owned outright. They couldn't reach the millions, so they aimed at the $500,000 they figured the house was worth. They weren't just pushing us to the basement, Gerald, Loretta said, her voice gone hard as iron. They were pushing us out of our own lives, one way or another. I looked at Harlan. So tell me, when did it happen? When did Clause 7B trigger? Harlan's expression carried a satisfaction he wasn't quite hiding. It triggered the moment Deshaun walked into that bank, 3 months ago. Deshaun has already disinherited Gerald. He simply hasn't been told. Loretta's hands were trembling, but not from fear anymore. Something far colder had taken over. They tried to have you committed, she said very quietly. They tried to have you declared incompetent and locked away. They did, I said, and they failed, so they came for the house. Those vultures, she said barely above a hiss. Gerald, what does this mean? What happens from here? I looked at Harlan. Tell her exactly what Deshaun has done to himself. Harlan pressed his fingertips together and addressed Loretta with measured professional calm. Loretta, when Gerald and I structured this trust, he was worried about this very situation. He feared that Deshawn, under certain influences, might one day view him as an asset to be harvested, rather than a father to be loved. So Gerald had me write in a very deliberate, very severe clause. We call it Clause 7B. What does it actually do? Loretta asked. We gave it a nickname, Harlan said, the wolf in sheep's clothing clause. It states that if any primary beneficiary, in this case, Deshawn Whitfield, is found to have committed any act of willful financial, emotional, or physical harm against the founders Gerald and Loretta Whitfield, that beneficiary is immediately and permanently removed from the trust. Loretta's eyes went wide. Permanently, irrevocably, as though his name had never appeared in the document. Harlan confirmed that the attempt to have Gerald declared mentally incompetent, an act of calculated financial and emotional harm, had already triggered the clause 3 months prior. And last night, he added, their move to seize your home and exile you to your own basement was the final undeniable confirmation. As of this moment, Deshawn Whitfield holds no legal claim to a single dollar of the $35 million Whitfield family trust. The words settled over the room like a verdict. $35 million. Gone. Loretta sat with it. Then where does it go? The money, the house, all of it. Where does it go? It passes, Harlan said, to the contingent beneficiary, the person Gerald designated to inherit everything in the event of Deshawn's disqualification. I felt the smile before I knew it was there. Celestine. Loretta looked up surprised. Your sister's girl. My sister's daughter, I said. The one who works as a public school nurse in Memphis. The one who calls us without fail every single Sunday just to check in. The one who still sends you a handmade card on your birthday, Loretta. Harlan nodded. I reached Celestine this morning and explained the situation. She was stunned as you'd expect, but she understood. She's flying in tonight. As of this moment, your niece Celestine Okafor is the legal heir to the entire estate, including the house at 312 Sycamore Bend. A deep quiet settled over us as the magnitude of it sank in. Then a slow, cold smile found its way across my face. He doesn't know, I said softly. No, Harlan said. He has no idea. As far as Deshawn is concerned, he's dealing with a worn-out old man sitting on a house he can take. They want that house. I said, something beginning to form in the back of my mind. They are desperate enough for that $500,000 to ruin our lives for it. So, I said, looking at Harlan, let's give it to them. Loretta looked at me sharply. Gerald, what are you saying? The trap, Loretta. They laid theirs. Now it's our turn. Harlan caught it immediately. His eyes came alive. Oh, that is brilliant, diabolical, and perfectly legal. What are the two of you planning? Loretta asked, somewhere between alarmed and intrigued. Harlan leaned in. Your family believes you are weak-old and senile, Loretta. They think they've won. They think Gerald slipped out last night like a frightened man with nowhere to go. They are arrogant, they are greedy, and they are not thinking clearly. We are going to use every bit of that arrogance against them. We're going to draft a document, Harlan said. A transfer of property and care agreement. It will look entirely official, I added. It will state that we, Gerald and Loretta Whitfield, in our diminished condition, voluntarily agree to sign over the deed to the house in exchange. Harlan continued, for Deshawn and Candace assuming full responsibility for our care. They'll fall over each other trying to sign it, Loretta said slowly and then caught herself. But the fine print? What does the fine print say? The fine print, Harlan said, with a satisfaction he didn't bother to conceal, will state that they, Deshawn and Candace Whitfield, along with their witnesses Clifford and Sylvette Langford, do hereby formally acknowledge and confirm that Gerald and Loretta Whitfield are in a vulnerable state, suffering from diminished capacity, and are unable to direct their own financial and personal affairs, that they are knowingly and willingly assuming control of all assets on that basis. It's not a transfer, I said. It's a confession, a signed witness notarized confession of conspiracy and elder abuse. My pulse was hammering, not from fear, not from grief, from something righteous and cold and long overdue. It's perfect, I said. They'll be so blinded by what they think they're getting, they'll sign their own destruction. Let's do it, Loretta said, her voice steady and firm. I picked up my phone. My hand didn't waver. I dialed Deshawn's number. He answered before the first ring had finished. He must have been clutching that phone all night, sick with worry, or something that wore worry's face. Dad, where are you? Is Mom okay? We've been out of our minds. His voice was a masterwork of counterfeit concern. It turned my stomach. I drew in a long, shuddering breath and let my voice go thin and frail. Deshaun, son? Dad, what's wrong? Your mother and I have been at a lawyer's office. I said, performing the role of a broken, beaten-down man. We've been talking through the night, and maybe you're right, son. A sharp silence on his end. He didn't dare breathe. What do you mean, Dad? His voice came out careful, stripped of certainty, afraid to reach for what it wanted. We're old, son, I said, letting my voice splinter at the edges. Loretta is a wreck. I can't keep fighting this. You said you'd take care of us. You said you'd handle everything the house. It's all too much. Oh, Dad, he breathed. The relief that poured through the line was nauseating. Yes, of course. We'll take care of everything. You're doing the right thing. I promise you. Good, I said. Then I need you to come to the lawyer's office. Harlan Beaumont in the Fountain Place Tower. I want to put the house in your name properly officially. Let's just get this finished. A beat of silence. I could practically feel the greed flooding in, drowning out whatever small caution remained. You're serious, he whispered. You'll sign it over today. Yes, I said. 2:00 p.m. Bring Candace and bring her parents. They've made themselves part of this. I want everyone present as witnesses, so everything is legal and above board. Yes, Dad. Absolutely. His voice had gone bright, almost giddy. We'll be there at 2. Don't you worry about a thing. We'll take care of you from now on. I know you will, son, I said. I know you will. I ended the call. I looked at Loretta. Her face was pale but set like stone. I looked at Harlan, who was already dictating the terms of the agreement to his assistant. He's hooked, I said. Harlan smiled. The trap is set. At precisely 2:00 in the afternoon, the heavy glass doors of the conference room opened. Deshaun and Candace came through, first followed closely by Clifford and Sylvette Langford. These were not the same 4 people from the night before. They had gone home cleaned up and dressed for what they clearly believed was their coronation. Deshaun had on his finest-looking suit, navy blue almost certainly purchased on credit. Candace wore a crisp white pantsuit, carrying herself like a CEO, arriving to close the deal of her career. Sylvette was draped in gold jewelry, her smile sharp as a blade. Clifford simply looked smug, as though he had personally engineered the whole thing from the start. Dad, Deshaun said, crossing to me and resting a hand on my shoulder. The weight of it felt possessive, proprietary. I'm so glad you're being reasonable. This is what's best, for all of us. Candace floated over to Loretta. Mother Loretta, she said, her voice dipped in artificial warmth. You look exhausted, poor thing. Don't give it another thought. We'll handle everything from here on out. You won't have to lift a finger. You will not regret this. Let's move this along, Clifford Langford announced, pulling a chair from the head of the table as though it were his by right. We have dinner reservations at 7. Harlan, unruffled and entirely professional, gestured for them to be seated. Thank you all for coming on short notice. As Mr. Whitfield conveyed to his son, he and Mrs. Whitfield have spent the night in serious deliberation and have arrived at an important decision. He slid 4 thick, professionally bound documents down the length of the polished mahogany table. This, Harlan said, is the care and property transfer agreement. It is a comprehensive document. Candace's eyes locked onto the cover sheet. She was practically vibrating. Let me walk you through the key provisions. Harlan continued, his voice a smooth legal cadence. The agreement states that Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Whitfield, the founders, agree to transfer full deed and title of the property at 312 Sycamore Bend to Mr. and Mrs. Deshaun Whitfield. Candace exhaled a small, sharp sound of relief. In exchange, Harlan went on, Mr. and Mrs. Deshaun Whitfield agree to provide comprehensive lifetime care for the founders. This includes, but is not limited to, housing, medical supervision, and complete financial management. Yes, absolutely. We agree, Candace said, already reaching for the pen at the center of the table. 100%. Where do we sign? Harlan raised a hand. Patience, Mrs. Whitfield. We proceed properly. There are several signature pages. He turned to Clifford and Sylvette. Since you, Mr. and Mrs. Langford, were present during the initial family discussion last evening and are here again today, we would appreciate your signatures as official witnesses to this agreement. Witnesses, Clifford said, drawing himself up. Of course. Excellent, Harlan said. Your signatures fall on page 8. It's a standard witness attestation. It confirms your presence, your participation in this agreement, and your ability to attest to the founder's state of mind. Their state of mind? Sylvette asked, her smile tightening just slightly. Yes, Harlan said smoothly, turning to the relevant page. Right here. By signing, you attest that you have personally observed and agree that Gerald and Loretta Whitfield are now in a condition requiring dedicated supervision, and that they are entering this agreement based on their acknowledged inability to manage their own affairs. Clifford and Sylvette exchanged a glance and smiled. They thought this was inspired. They believed it locked in the legal argument that we were senile, confirmed in writing by our own lawyer. Of course, Clifford said with a satisfied nod. We're more than willing to attest to that. We've been saying it for months. They are clearly in need of supervision. Wonderful, Harlan said. Then let's proceed. He passed the first copy to Candace. She didn't bother to open it. She went straight to the final page and signed with a sweeping flourish. Deshawn followed his signature, shakier, more rushed, but just as blind. They read nothing. Not the clauses confirming their acknowledgement of our diminished capacity. Not the fine print laying out their willingness to assume full control. They just signed. Then Harlan passed the next two copies to Clifford and Sylvette. They too flipped directly to page 8 and affixed their names as witnesses, legally certifying our incompetence with evident pride. Finally, Harlan slid the last copy in front of Loretta and me. I looked at her. Her hand was rock steady. She picked up the heavy, costly pen and signed her name. Then I signed mine. Harlan gathered all 4 copies and squared them neatly on the table. Well, he said, tapping the edges together, that appears to be everything. Candace rose to her feet, beaming. She brought her palms together in a single sharp clap. Perfect, that's that. Deshawn, sweetheart, we need to call the contractors. They can get started on the master bedroom tomorrow. She turned toward us. Dad, Mom, we'll help you start moving your things down to the basement the moment we get home. It'll be so much more manageable for you down there. Deshawn looked as though a weight or more, precisely $750,000 worth of weight, had been lifted clean off him. I let the moment breathe. I let them steep in their victory. I watched the greed and the relief and the sheer brazen arrogance play out across their faces. I gave them a full 10 seconds. Then I looked at Harlan. He gave a small nod. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through Candace's chatter, clear, calm, and strong. We're not quite finished. Candace's smile faltered. What do you mean? We signed everything. You did? I agreed. But there's one small logistical problem with the document you just signed. A minor detail. Clifford Langford's eyes narrowed. What detail? I leaned forward. The house, I said. I don't actually own it. Candace's triumphant expression froze on her face. Clifford, who a moment ago had looked like a man who'd just brokered the deal of a lifetime, securing his daughter's future by neatly disposing of her inconvenient in-laws, now went very still. Actually, Mr. and Mrs. Whitfield, we are not quite finished, Harlan said. His voice had shifted. The measured, accommodating manner had left it entirely. What replaced it was something sharp and cold, the voice of a lawyer who was done negotiating and had started dictating. Candace, already angling toward the door, stopped. What do you mean we signed the papers? It's done. What I mean, Harlan said, is that there is a small technical problem with the care and property transfer agreement you just signed. Clifford let out an impatient, dismissive sigh. What problem? It's a standard transfer. I'm a lawyer myself, Beaumont, or I was. I know how these instruments work. Do you? Harlan asked, one eyebrow lifting. Yes, Clifford said flatly. We pulled the county records before we ever set foot in this building. The property at 312 Sycamore Bend is registered to Gerald Whitfield. He just signed his rights over. It's concluded. Let's go. Harlan Beaumont smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man who had spent the last 24 hours laying a trap and had just watched 4 people stride into it without breaking stride. That is precisely where your argument collapses, Mr. Langford. You pulled the public records, but you couldn't and didn't pull the trust records. Mr. Whitfield's name does appear on that deed, yes, but only in his capacity as trust manager. The atmosphere in the room shifted like a charge before a storm. Deshawn, who moments ago had looked like a man reprieved, now wore an expression of pure bewilderment. What does that mean? What trust? The true legal and incontestable owner of that property, Harlan continued and has held that ownership for the past 20 years, is the Whitfield Family Trust. The what? Candace's voice shot up an octave into a thin, strangled squeak. The Whitfield Family Trust. I said, speaking for the first time since they had all walked through that door. My trust. The one I created in 2004, right after the sale of my company. Deshaun stared at me, his face wiped completely blank. You have a trust. What, like a little retirement account somewhere? No, son, I said, leaning in. Not like a little account. Like all the accounts. Sylvette Langford let out a short, contemptuous laugh. A trust. Don't be absurd. You're in that modest little house. You're driving that 10-year-old Buick. You're nothing but a retired architect. What on earth could you be sitting on? In a trust a few $1,000s, maybe. This is a pitiful waste of everyone's time. I looked over at Sylvette. I let her arrogance, her thorough, absolute miscalculation hang in the air between us. I gave her one final glorious moment of feeling superior. Harlan, I said, my voice even and unhurried. What is the current valuation of the Whitfield Family Trust? Harlan reached for a different folder, a thick one they hadn't laid eyes on before, and opened it. As of this morning's market open, Mr. Whitfield, the trust's liquid and fixed assets are valued at $35,421,000 and change. The silence that poured in afterward was so complete I could make out the faint hum of the ventilation system. I heard Loretta release a trembling breath beside me. She already knew, but having those figures spoken aloud in this room still hit her like a wave. Deshaun just stared at me. His mouth fell open, then shut again. Not a word came out. Clifford Langford's smug, heavy face crumpled. He looked like a man who'd taken a punch squarely to the jaw. 35 million. But the reaction I will carry with me the rest of my days, the one I'll treasure, was Candace's. Her face cycled through emotions the way a slot machine cycles through symbols. First, total incomprehension. Then, flat-out disbelief. Then, a wild, all-consuming, euphoric joy. Her eyes blazed like she'd just seen every light in the city turn on at once. 35 million. She breathed, swinging her gaze to Deshaun, her voice barely holding together. Baby, we're rich. She actually started laughing, a high, hysterical sound that was half sob. He has $35 million. Oh my God. Deshaun, we're rich. She threw herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Deshaun, who was still standing there, like a man turned to stone. We're rich. We don't even need that house. Who cares about the house? We get the trust. She pulled back from him and spun around to face me, her whole manner transforming in the space of a heartbeat. The manufactured sweetness evaporated, and in its place came something frantic, desperate clawing. Dad, oh Dad, I mean Gerald. I knew it. I always knew there was something extraordinary about you. I always said to Deshaun, your father is such a dignified man, so wise. On de died besadig forstur. Stop! My voice was cold. It sliced through her frantic gushing and left her frozen mid-word. What? She asked, the smile slipping. You're not rich, I said. He's not rich. You get nothing. She went still. What do you mean? Deshaun asked. He's your son. He's the beneficiary. He was, I said. But the agreement? Candace stammered, jabbing a finger at the document spread across the table. We signed everything. We have a deal. Ah, yes, Harlan Beaumont said, lifting the stack of papers they had autographed so eagerly. He held them aloft. The care and property transfer agreement. My sincere thanks for this. It's an extraordinarily valuable document. Candace glanced at her father, confused. See, it's valuable. Oh, it absolutely is, Harlan agreed. But not as any transfer of property. As I said, that portion is entirely void. Gerald does not hold title to the house he was purporting to sign over. No, what makes this document valuable is that it functions as a confession. Clifford Langford's face drained from pale to a sickly waxen gray. He understood now. A confession, Deshaun whispered. Yes, I said, looking straight at my son. You, your wife, and your in-laws have just put your signatures on a legally binding document, witnessed and attested, declaring that you believe I am mentally incompetent, that you believe I am suffering from diminished capacity, and that you have been conspiring to seize control of my assets on the basis of that belief. You just handed me every piece of proof I would ever need to walk into a courtroom. Deshaun looked at the papers, then at me, then at Harlan. The color left his face, and what replaced it was a dark, hot surge of fury. So what? He exploded, slamming his open palm down on the mahogany table. The crack made Candace flinch, and Loretta drew back sharply. So what? It's a piece of paper. It's a setup. It means absolutely nothing. He turned those wild, panicked eyes on me, his voice climbing, cracking at the edges. You can't pull this on me. I am your son. Your only son. I'm the beneficiary. That trust, that 35 million, belongs to me. You can't just rip it away. He can't do this. Right, Clifford. Tell them he can't. He was looking at me, but pleading toward his wife, toward his in-laws, desperate to find someone to anchor him. Desperate to anchor himself. It's my birthright. You were the beneficiary, Deshawn, I said, quietly. The stillness behind my words seemed to frighten him far more than any raised voice ever could. You were the beneficiary right up until 10:15 a.m. on Tuesday, August 12th, 3 months ago. Deshawn went rigid. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't you? I asked. August 12th, a meeting at Lone Star Heritage Bank. You, your father-in-law, Clifford, and an attorney from his firm. Does any of that sound familiar? The life drained out of Deshawn's expression. He looked like a man who'd just been shot. How did you know about that? The bank said it was a confidential inquiry. They called me, Harlan Beaumont said, his voice carrying the temperature of deep winter. The moment you walked out of that building, as the administrator of the Whitfield Trust, I am legally obligated to investigate any hostile inquiries or attempts to seize control of the assets. Hostile inquiries, Deshawn stammered, scrambling for solid ground. I was just asking questions. I was concerned about him, about his condition. You were not asking questions, Deshawn, I said, and I stood up for the first time. I felt tall. I felt like myself. You were making accusations. You told the board members I was senile. You told them I was hoarding. You held up my quiet, private way of living as evidence of severe mental deterioration, a danger to myself and to the estate. You walked in there with a lawyer and petitioned that board to have me declared mentally incompetent and to hand you emergency signatory authority over all 35 million. And that, Harlan said, was a catastrophic miscalculation because that single act of deliberate, willful betrayal triggered Clause 7B. Clause 7B, Candace whispered, her face the color of ash. What is Clause 7B? That I said is the provision of this trust I prayed to God I would never be forced to invoke. I moved around the table until I stood directly in front of my son. He was trembling. When I built this trust, I knew your heart, Deshawn. I believed it was good. But I also understood your vulnerability. I knew how easily you could be steered. I knew how badly you needed the approval of people like them. I gestured toward the Langfords, people who only understand value when it comes with a price tag. So I had Harlan engineer a safeguard into the very core of the trust, a fail-safe, a poison pill. We have always called it the wolf in sheep's clothing clause. Loretta, who had not spoken a single word since they had arrived, finally broke her silence. Her voice was ice. Explain it. It states, I said, looking directly into Deshawn's terrified eyes in plain and ironclad legal terms, that if the primary beneficiary, Deshawn Whitfield, or any person acting alongside him, such as his wife or his in-laws, is found to have committed willful financial, emotional, or physical harm against me or your mother, that beneficiary is immediately, automatically, and permanently disinherited, as though his name had never appeared in the trust at all. Permanent? Loretta said softly. It was a verdict, not a question. The moment you sat in that bank and moved to have me erased from my own life, Deshawn, I said, you erased yourself from my legacy. You get nothing. Not the house, not the savings, not one penny of the trust, not now, not ever. The words settled over the room like ash falling after a fire. Clifford Langford was the first to recover enough to speak his lawyer's mind, already clawing for a crack in the foundation. This is outrageous. It's coercion. It's a contract of adhesion. It will not survive a court challenge. We will fight every word of it. Harlan Beaumont actually laughed at that. A dry, unhurried sound with no warmth in it whatsoever. Fight it with what, Mr. Langford? It has already survived. This trust was stress-tested against this precise challenge by 2 federal courts at the time it was drafted. It is ironclad. Your client disqualified himself 3 months ago through his own choices. Harlan lifted the stack of documents they had just signed, and to compound the damage, he and every one of you just executed a fully notarized confession acknowledging the very acts that disqualify him. The game is finished. You lost. And that was the moment Candace grasped that the house was nothing. The $35 million, the dream, the entire reason she had shown up in this room, the whole foundation her marriage had been built on, all of it was gone. It had never belonged to her. She turned to Deshawn, her face carrying a look of pure, cold, reptilian hatred. "You idiot," she hissed at him. "You failed." And then her eyes rolled back and she went down sliding without any dignity from her expensive chair and crumpling onto the Turkish kilim rug in a dead faint. Candace was still on the floor, propped on one elbow. Her costly white pantsuit had picked up smudges from the rug's surface. Clifford and Sylvette Langford sat frozen in their chairs, faces a sickly grayish color, looking like figures in a museum dedicated to their own arrogance. Deshawn? My son was the only person in the room still moving. He was shaking his head again and again, as if repetition could physically undo the words he'd just absorbed. He paid no attention to his fainted wife. He ignored his shell-shocked in-laws. His eyes were fixed only on me, wide with a desperate childlike panic. "No," he whispered. "No, if not me, then who?" His voice splintered. "Who gets it? Who gets the house? Who inherits everything? It doesn't just vanish, does it?" He looked around the room as if the $35 million were a solid, tangible object, a prize that had been pledged to him, and he was terrified it had simply ceased to exist. I didn't answer him. I didn't need to. I turned my head and nodded toward Harlan. "Harlan, I believe our other guest has been waiting. Would you bring her in?" Harlan pressed a small button on the conference room intercom. "You can come in now, Celestine." The side door, the one that connected to Harlan's private office, swung open. A young woman entered. She was around 30, dressed in plain blue nurse's scrubs. Her hair was swept back in a no-fuss ponytail, and her face was warm, but marked by a deep, abiding sadness. It was my niece Celestine, my sister's daughter. Deshawn's head whipped toward her, and his confusion curdled instantly into a fresh, raw, burning fury. "Celestine, what the hell are you doing here? This is a private family matter. Get out." On the floor, Candace had managed to push herself upright. Her hair was in disarray, and her makeup had begun to streak. She spotted Celestine, and her expression curled into contempt. "The nurse? What is she doing here? Did someone call her about our blood pressure? Get her out of here." Celestine stopped a few feet short of the table. She looked at Deshawn, not with anger, but with a deep, steely pity. "Hello, Deshawn. I'm here because Uncle Gerald and Aunt Loretta asked me to come. She is here." Harlan Beaumont said, his voice cutting cleanly through the tension, as the contingent beneficiary of the Whitfield Family Trust. Deshawn just stared. The what? As of 9:00 a.m. this morning, Harlan went on, "Upon your legal and permanent disqualification under Clause 7B, the status of primary beneficiary was dissolved. As set forth in the Trust's bylaws, all assets, rights, and titles transfer immediately to the contingent beneficiary, in this case, Ms. Celestine Okafor." Harlan glanced at Celestine and gave a single nod. "As of 9:00 a.m. this morning, Celestine is the sole heir to the entire $35 million estate. The silence that fell was total. Candace, still on the floor, made a small, strangled sound. Clifford Langford looked like a man whose heart was giving out. Deshawn just shook his head, a wild, hollow laugh breaking loose from somewhere deep in his chest. "Her you're handing everything to her, a part-time nurse from Memphis. This has to be a joke. This is the cruelest joke I have ever sat through." "It is not a joke," Deshawn, Celestine said. Her voice was measured, but it filled every corner of the room. She stepped forward and set a single crisp legal document on the table directly in front of him. It landed with a quiet, final thud. "What is this?" Deshawn whispered, not quite willing to touch it. "As the new legal administrator of the trust," Celestine said, "which, as you now understand, is the sole owner of the property at 312 Sycamore Bend, this is a formal legal notice of eviction." Candace scrambled to her feet, her white suit now rumpled and diminished. "Eviction. You can't evict us. That's our house." "No," Candace Celestine said, meeting her eyes directly for the first time. "It is my house now. Or rather, it belongs to the trust which I manage on behalf of my aunt and uncle. You and Deshawn were living there as guests. Last night you attempted to evict the rightful tenants and confine them to the basement. You are no longer guests." She pressed a fingertip to the document. "This notice gives you and your husband, Deshawn Whitfield, exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises." 24 hours, Deshawn erupted, his voice finally finding its full force. "That's insane. We have belongings there. Our furniture, our entire lives are in that house. You have 24 hours to remove your personal movable property." Celestine stated, her voice steady as iron. "Anything remaining in the house after 2 p.m. tomorrow including your wife's blueprints for her marble island and your father-in-law's laser distance meter, will be treated as abandoned property. It will be liquidated immediately with the proceeds donated to a charity serving the elderly. The locks on every door will be changed at 2:01 p.m. tomorrow. You bitch! Candace shrieked, and she actually lunged across the table. I would not do that, Mrs. Whitfield, Harlan said calmly, stepping squarely into her path without so much as a flinch. You are already facing potential criminal charges for conspiracy to commit elder fraud. Adding assault to that list would be, and I'm using the precise legal term here, exceptionally stupid. Candace stopped. Her arm still raised her face, a rigid mask of helpless, ugly rage. As of this moment, Celestine said, you are all trespassing in this office, and if any of you set foot on the property at 312 Sycamore Bend, again without my or my aunt and uncle's express written permission, I will have you arrested. Deshawn heard none of it. He brushed past Harlan past the length of the table until he was standing directly in front of me. His face was destroyed, tears sweat the full wreckage of a man undone. He choked, jabbing a finger toward Celestine. Over me. Why, Dad, I'm your son. I'm your blood. She's just your sister's child. I looked at my son. My heart was heavy, not with anger anymore, but with a vast, quiet sadness. You are right, Deshawn, I said. You're my blood. But I turned and gestured toward Celestine, who was now standing beside Loretta, holding her hand. She is my family. She's the one who calls Loretta every Sunday just to talk. She's the one who remembers my birthday not with a text message, but with a handwritten card. She's the one who, when Loretta had her knee surgery 2 years ago, flew in on her own dime and sat beside her hospital bed for 3 days, sleeping in a chair asking for nothing in return. You are my son, Deshawn, but she is my family. I held his gaze. You are just a disappointment. Clifford Langford. His face a shade of purple fury, finally accepted that the game was done. He was a man built to win, and he had just been checkmated in front of his own family. He seized Sylvette by the arm and pulled her roughly to her feet. This is preposterous, he sputtered, wrenching his suit jacket back into place. A complete farce. We will not sit here and be insulted by this nurse and a senile old man who thinks he's a king. That's right, Sylvette chimed in, frantically brushing non-existent dust from her expensive silk blouse. We are leaving. Deshawn, Candace, collect your things. We don't need any of this charity. We have our own money. We certainly don't need his $35 million. They moved toward the door, a pitiful attempt to reclaim authority to make it appear they were walking away from us, rather than being cast out. Candace, emboldened by her parents' display, began to rally. She grabbed Deshawn's arm. Let's go, Deshawn. We'll fight all of this. We'll take them to court. We don't need them. Oh, but I'm afraid you do, Mr. Langford. Harlan's voice, smooth as polished stone, cut right across them. They stopped their hands inches from the brass door handle. Excuse me? Clifford sneered, turning slowly. I said, Harlan repeated quietly, I'm afraid you do need them. Or, more precisely, you needed his money. Please return to your seats. We haven't reached the end of the presentation. We have nothing further to discuss. Clifford growled. On the contrary, Harlan replied, pressing a button on the small remote in his hand. The large projector screen, recessed in the ceiling, hummed to life, and descended without a sound. You all came into this room today under the pretense of concern for Gerald and Loretta. We are simply here to explore the full depth of that concern. The screen illuminated, displaying a document headed in large, bold letters, Liability Report, Whitfield, Deshawn, and Candace. Deshawn and Candace went still. What is this? What you are about to hear is the moment when everything this family thought they understood came apart at the seams. Before I get there, let me ask you something. If you suspected someone close to you had been quietly working against you, would you confront them the moment you knew, or would you wait and let them walk into their own trap? Deshawn demanded, his voice climbing toward panic. You have no right. That's private. It was private, Harlan corrected him. Until you made it the trust's business by attempting to defraud it. As the administrator, I carry a fiduciary duty to protect the trust from every credible threat. And you, Mr. Whitfield, along with your accomplices, have become the most significant threat of all. He aimed the red dot of a laser pointer at the screen. You see, we were deeply curious about why you were so desperate. Why try to have your own father committed? Why stake everything on this $500,000 house? The $35 million was the obvious prize, but the house, that was a smaller, more frantic move. It pointed to a severe cash flow crisis. Harlan clicked the remote. A long list of credit card accounts filled the screen. American Express Platinum Chase, Sapphire Reserve, Visa, Black 22. Different cards in total. The two of you, Harlan said, turning to address Deshawn and Candace directly, are living a spectacular lie. Your combined income before taxes runs approximately $150,000 a year. That is none of your concern. Candace snapped, her face draining of color. It is now, Harlan said. Because your combined spending according to these statements covering the last 12 months was just over $385,000, a deficit of $235,000. But naturally, it gets considerably worse. He clicked again. A new slide materialized: personal loans, payday advances, and applications for a second mortgage on their condo. Add it all up, Harlan said, his voice steady in the silent room. Your current unsecured high-interest debt totals $754,212.90. What? The voice wasn't Deshawn's, it was Candace's. She wheeled toward her husband, her face bone white, something sickening dawning behind her eyes. 700,000! She breathed the words barely audible. Deshawn couldn't meet her gaze. He was fixed on the screen, on the numbers that spelled out his total ruin laid bare under the harsh fluorescent light. You told me it was 200, she shrieked, her voice fracturing. You said it was one bad business loan. You lied to me. Deshawn finally looked at her, his face caving in. I was going to fix it. I just needed one big break. I thought... You thought what? Candace screamed, tears of pure rage cutting down her face. You thought you'd steal my father-in-law's house to cover your... What even is this? This, Harlan said smoothly. Clicking to the next slide is a detailed transaction history from 6 different offshore online sports betting accounts. It appears, Mr. Whitfield, that the overwhelming portion of this debt has nothing to do with buying your wife expensive bags. It's from gambling. You've gambled away nearly $500,000 you never had. Candace looked as though she might be physically sick. She stepped away from Deshawn as if he were something contagious. Clifford Langford, however, looked almost relieved. He spotted an opening to separate himself from the wreckage. A gambler, he said, his voice thick with theatrical revulsion. My God, Sylvette, can you believe this? This con artist married our daughter. He played all of us, Sylvette agreed, clutching at her collar. He was going to drag our poor Candace straight down with him. The liar. But that isn't entirely accurate, is it? Harlan said, his voice going to something quietly dangerous. Clifford and Sylvette went rigid. What do you mean? Clifford asked. Harlan pressed the remote. The screen changed. Now it read, Langford Clifford and Sylvette Financial Inquiry. What is this? Sylvette stammered, her manufactured outrage evaporating. You have no right to our financial records. Again I do, Harlan said. The moment you signed that document as witnesses to a fraudulent act, you made yourselves legal accomplices in this conspiracy. I had to understand why a supposedly prosperous man like you, Clifford, would gamble his entire reputation on such a thin, illegal scheme, unless, of course, you were every bit as desperate as your son-in-law. The screen loaded with fresh data. It seems your boutique hedge fund, Mr. Langford, is not performing particularly well. In fact, it has been under active SEC investigation for serious capital irregularities for the past 6 months. Clifford Langford stopped breathing. My investigators determined that you have been drawing heavily from your clients' trust accounts to paper over your own catastrophic market losses. Harlan continued, You're not simply struggling, Clifford. You are insolvent, and you are about to be indicted. You monster! Sylvette shrieked, rounding on her husband. You told me the business was solid. You said you were untouchable. And you, Clifford roared back, his face flooding purple. You told me your mother gave you that money. That's a lie. Oh, isn't it? Harlan said, clicking one final time. And you, Sylvette, that generous assistance you provided your daughter the money for the Porsche Cayenne. Candace was driving the down payment on their condo that didn't come from your husband's thriving enterprise. We traced every transaction. You have been systematically draining your own 88-year-old mother's retirement account without her knowledge. An account, I should note, that she kept at our bank. You common thief, Clifford howled at his wife. You're one to talk. You fraud. It collapsed right there. The screaming, the accusations, the raw and ugly truth of their lives detonating in the middle of Harlan's conference room. It was something to behold. Harlan Beaumont let them implode for a full minute. A symphony of destruction. Then he cleared his throat. It appears he said, switching off the screen, pulling the room back into heavy silence, that you did not arrive here as a caring family looking after an old man. You were a house of cards already mid-collapse, and every one of you was trying to use Jerry and Loretta as your foundation. The meeting is over. That heavy silence held for a full 10 seconds. Candace broke it. She hadn't fainted. She had been calculating. Very slowly she rose to her feet, face-pale eyes locked on my son, Deshaun. "You," she whispered. Her voice had shed every trace of sweetness. It was a low reptilian hiss. "You lying, worthless fraud." Deshaun, who had not moved his stare from the blank screen, where his 35 million had just evaporated, flinched. "What, Candace, I didn't lie. I thought—" "You thought," she shrieked, her voice rocketing into a register that made everyone wince. "You told me your family had old money. You told me your father was just modest and a little eccentric. You said this house was only the beginning." I was trying to give you what you wanted," Deshaun shouted back his desperation, finally finding a channel in anger. "I was trying to keep up. Who was the one who needed the Porsche Cayenne? Who had to have the downtown condo? Who dropped $10,000 on a single handbag last week? Because you told me we could afford it," she screamed, advancing a step, her hands balled into fists. "I was trying to make it work. I was managing it." Managing it? Sylvette Langford, having recovered from her own shock, got to her feet, venom soaking every word. "You call $750,000 in gambling debts managing it. You are a degenerate, Deshaun. You married our daughter under false pretenses. You are a common con artist." "Oh, I'm the con artist," Deshaun laughed, a high, broken, terrible sound. "Your husband is a crook. He's about to be indicted by the SEC, and you—" He thrust a finger at Sylvette. "You stole from your own 88-year-old mother. You're a pack of hypocrites, a family of vampires." Clifford Langford let out a roar and launched himself across the table. "You ungrateful little I'll kill you gentlemen." Harlan Beaumont's voice was not raised, but it cracked through the chaos like a whip. He stepped between Clifford and Deshaun. "That is enough." The room went silent again, the air trembling with raw hatred. "This," Harlan said, sweeping a look of complete disgust across all four of them, "is a place of business. It is my office. You will not reduce it to whatever this has become. The meeting, as I said before, is over. The trust is secure. The documents are signed. I must now insist that you take your family disputes elsewhere immediately." Candace wasn't looking at her parents. She wasn't looking at Harlan. She was staring at Deshaun, and I could see the final cold arithmetic clicking into place behind her eyes. This wasn't anger anymore. It was grief, but she wasn't mourning the man. She was mourning the money. "So, that's it," Deshaun whispered, his voice hollow. He could see it too. It was always just the money. Candace, already gathering up her expensive bag, ignored him. "You never loved me," Deshaun said a fraction louder. "You love this." He gestured at the polished, opulent room around them. "You loved the idea of all this, the $35 million. Candace finally stopped. She turned to face him. Her expression was cold, composed, stripped of everything. All the manufactured warmth, all the honeyed words gone. "Well, he was rich," she said, her voice flat. "And you were too foolish to even inherit it properly. You couldn't manage that one simple thing, could you? That was the bullet. I watched my son take it. I saw the last ember of the weak, desperate boy who had run himself into the ground trying to please her simply go out. He pulled himself upright. He looked at her, truly looked at her as if seeing her clearly for the very first time. "You are a monster," he whispered. Candace just laughed, a short, ugly, joyless bark. "No, Deshaun. I'm just practical, and you turned out to be a very, very bad investment." She turned toward her parents. "Let's go. I need a drink. I need to call my lawyer." "Wait," Deshaun said. She turned back, her face a wall of irritation. "What now?" "Are you going to beg? It won't work." Deshaun slowly, deliberately raised his left hand. "You forgot this." He worked the simple gold wedding band off his finger. It had been my own father's ring, the one I'd placed on his hand the day he told me he was getting married. He held it a moment, then dropped it onto the polished floor. It skittered across the mahogany and came to rest right at her designer shoes. "I'm divorcing you," he said. Candace looked down at the ring. Then she looked back at him and laughed again, that same horrible, brittle sound. "Divorce me? You can't afford to divorce me, you fool. I'll take weight." She stopped. The final terrible realization landed on her. There's nothing to take. Exactly, I said from my chair. Candace's face crumpled. What remained of her composure shattered into pure, undiluted fury. She tore the massive glittering diamond ring, the one he had bought with a fraudulent loan, off her own finger. "Fine!" she screamed. "You want it? Take it." She didn't throw it at the floor. She threw it straight at his face. Deshawn ducked, and the ring worth a fortune he never possessed struck the glass conference room wall behind him with a sharp crack. "I would rather go home and live with my criminal parents," she spat, her voice thick with venom, "than spend one more second breathing the same air as a broke, pathetic failure like you." She grabbed Sylvette's arm. "Let's go. I'm calling my lawyer. I want an annulment." Sylvette, looking utterly defeated and 10 years older than when she'd walked in, let her daughter drag her from the room. Clifford Langford was the last to leave. He didn't glance at his wife or his daughter. He paused at the door, turned and looked directly at me. His eyes were cold, dead, and carrying a hatred that felt almost solid. "You," he growled, his voice low. "You enjoyed every second of this. You planned the whole thing, this entire humiliation." "No, Clifford," I said, holding his gaze. "I didn't plan anything. I just lived my life quietly. You planned, you conspired. You were the ones who were arrogant enough to think it would work. I just had a better emergency exit." He stared at me for a long, terrible moment, the promise of future battles hanging between us like smoke. Then he turned and walked out after his family, pulling the heavy door shut behind him. The latch clicked into place and the sound echoed through the sudden, profound stillness. The heavy glass door closed and the room was swallowed by a thick, abrupt silence. Every trace of Candace's screaming and Clifford's threats seemed to be pulled clean out of the air, leaving nothing behind. They were all gone. The Langfords with their counterfeit wealth and genuine cruelty. Candace with her venom and her appetite. They had dissolved like a bad dream in daylight. The only one remaining was Deshawn. He hadn't left. He couldn't. He was a heap on the floor beside the conference room door, a 38-year-old man in a rumpled suit sobbing into both hands. A man who had just lost his wife, his in-laws, his home, and a $35 million fortune. All within the span of 15 minutes. He was completely, utterly, and finally alone. Loretta let out a long, unsteady breath and sank heavily into her chair. Celestine, my niece, moved quietly to stand behind her and rested a comforting hand on her shoulder. Harlan Beaumont, my lawyer, showed no emotion whatsoever. He walked calmly back to the head of the table. He gathered the signed 10-page care and property transfer agreement. The confession tapped it neatly into order against the tabletop and placed it with care into a fresh, unmarked folder. Deshawn didn't move. He stayed there on the expensive rug, his shoulders heaving with these awful, gasping, choked sobs, the sounds of a child who has understood far too late that he is in deep and irreversible trouble. I wanted to feel something, pity, anger, anything, but I felt hollow. There was only a vast aching sadness for the boy I had raised, and the man he had not managed to become. I let him cry for a long, heavy minute. He needed to reach the absolute bottom of the pit he had spent years digging for himself. Finally, Harlan cleared his throat. "Mr. Whitfield." Deshawn flinched at the formal address. He pushed himself up from the floor slowly and painfully. His face was a wreck, swollen, blotched, his suit stained with his own tears. He looked at Harlan, eyes wild with terror. "Please," Deshawn whispered, his voice stripped raw. Just let me go. I'll leave. I'll find a motel. I won't come near you again. I have nothing. It's over." Harlan Beaumont studied him, his face giving nothing away. "You are mistaken, Mr. Whitfield. You still have a great many things." Deshawn looked baffled. "What? You have criminal liabilities," Harlan said. Deshawn's head snapped up. What are you talking about? It's over. This is a family matter, an inheritance dispute. You won. You took everything." This was never a meeting about an inheritance. Deshawn, Harlan said, his voice dropping into something sharper and clinical, the voice of a man building a case. "This was a meeting to finalize the evidence against you. You seem to believe this ends here in this room. It does not. It ends in a courtroom. Evidence for what? For what?" Harlan actually reached into his briefcase and produced a fresh yellow legal pad, clicking his pen. "Let's go through them, shall we?" First he said, "Conspiracy to commit felony elder fraud. You, your wife, and your in-laws conspired to strip your parents of their legal property by making fraudulent claims of mental incompetence. He held up the stack of papers they had all signed. A charge to which all of you have very helpfully just confessed in writing before witnesses. Deshaun had begun to shake a visible tremor moving up from his hands. No, we were only trying to. Second Harlan continued writing on the pad without looking up. Attempted wire and bank fraud a federal offense. 3 months ago, you and Clifford Langford personally appeared at Lone Star Heritage Bank and petitioned to seize control of the Whitfield Trust's assets, filing false claims about your father's mental state. The bank's security footage is excellent. The branch manager's testimony is even better. I was only worried about him, Deshaun pleaded. Third Harlan went on, not pausing for a moment. Forgery attempting to access trust funds under what you represented to be your father's authority. And finally, my personal favorite felony, elder abuse. You intentionally and systematically inflicted profound emotional and psychological distress on your parents, both citizens over the age of 65, for the explicit purpose of financial gain. In this state that carries a mandatory minimum prison sentence, the word settled in the room, prison. Deshaun's face shifted from pale to a sickly greenish white. He had stopped crying. He looked like a man about to be sick. Jail! He whispered, his voice cracking apart. You're talking about jail. I'm talking about prison, Deshaun. Harlan's voice was ice. Men like Clifford Langford, white collar, criminals, they get prison. But men like you who gamble away $750,000 and then move to defraud their elderly parents to plug the hole, judges are not lenient with men like you. Deshaun's legs gave way, and he dropped back into the nearest chair. He didn't look at Harlan. He didn't look at Loretta. He turned his wide, terrified, pleading eyes on me. Dad, he choked out. Dad, please. You wouldn't. He stumbled up from the chair and fell to his knees in front of me. His hands closed around the legs of my new $2,000 Midnight Navy suit. Dad, please. You wouldn't send your own son to prison. You wouldn't do that to me. It was Candace. It was her parents. They put those ideas in my head. They told me it was normal. I was desperate. I love you, Dad. I've always loved you. Please don't do this. I looked down at the 38-year-old man weeping at my feet. You love me, I repeated. The words tasted like gravel. You tried to have me declared insane and put away in a nursing home. Deshaun, is that what love looks like to you? You stood in my kitchen in my house and told me I ought to just accept being moved to the basement. I didn't, he sobbed. I was scared. You were greedy, I said, and now you are pathetic. You asked me whether I would send my son to prison. Let me ask you this, would a son try to send his own father to a mental institution? You already have my answer. You gave it to me yourself last night. I looked over at Harlan. Harlan is there, any path by which he can avoid this. Deshaun looked up, his face slick with tears, desperate new hope flooding into his eyes. Yes, Harlan said. As I informed Mr. Whitfield before this meeting, he is conditionally willing to show mercy. He is prepared to instruct my office not to forward this entire airtight file to the district attorney. Anything, Deshaun cried, still on his knees. I'll do anything, Dad. I swear, anything. On one, Harlan said, very specific set of conditions. They are absolute. They are non-negotiable. Do you understand? Deshaun nodded frantically. Yes. Just tell me. First, Harlan said, you will sign the full and detailed confession of your actions, which my team has already prepared based on the document you signed earlier. Second, you will sign the divorce papers we are drafting at this moment, citing irreconcilable differences and waiving all claims to any community property present or future. Third, you will agree to a permanent 500-mile restraining order against Candace Langford and her parents. We must ensure you are never again drawn back under their toxic influence. Yes, I'll do it, Deshaun said, nodding, seizing at the lifeline. Is that everything? I'll sign it all right now. And fourth, Harlan said, his voice dropping lower, the most important condition, the one that Mr. Whitfield, your father, designed himself. Deshaun was still on his knees, eyes lifted toward Harlan, bracing for the final blow. He was a cornered man, ready to accept anything. But before Harlan could speak, Loretta raised her hand. Wait, Harlan, just wait. She had been a near ghost throughout the room, absorbing every awful revelation in silence. Now she rose from her chair. She walked past me, past Celestine, and came to stand directly over her son. I expected her usual softness. I expected tears, but her face was set hard. It was the face of a mother who had been betrayed all the way to her foundation. Before we get to conditions, she said, her voice trembling but carrying clearly across the room, I need to understand one thing. Deshaun looked up at her, his face destroyed. Mom, anything. Why? She asked. It was the simplest question in the world and the most impossible to answer. Just why we loved you, Deshaun. We gave you everything we had. Your father worked his entire life quietly without complaint, building something that was always meant to be yours. We never asked for a thing in return. Not gratitude, not phone calls, not holidays, nothing. We just wanted you to be happy and good. Her voice cracked on that last word. Deshaun's head dropped. I can explain, he whispered. No, Loretta said, and the single syllable hit harder than anything Harlan had said in the past hour. You can't, because there's no explanation, Deshaun. There's no version of this story where what you did makes sense to me. She looked down at him, and I watched something shift in her eyes, not softening, but resigning itself. A grief too deep for anger. I carried you, she said quietly. I held you. I was there every single time you were sick, every nightmare, every heartbreak, going all the way back to elementary school. And you sat in a bank office and told strangers your father was losing his mind so you could take his money. Deshaun was sobbing again silently, this time tears just falling without sound. Mom, I was in trouble. I was drowning. I didn't know what else. You could have called us, she said, simply, flatly, like the truth of it cost her nothing because she had nothing left to spend. You could have picked up the phone. You could have said, Dad, I'm in trouble. I need help. And you know what your father would have done. She glanced back at me. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. He would have helped you, Loretta said. That's who he is. That's who he has always been. And instead of asking, you conspired. The word fell like a stone. Deshaun flinched as if it had struck him physically. I know, he said. He wasn't trying to defend himself anymore. He just said it, flat, broken. I know. I was wrong. I was so wrong. Loretta stared at him for a long time, long enough that the silence in the room became its own presence. Then she looked at me. Gerald, she said. Her voice was quiet and even, and held 23 years of marriage inside it. I looked at her. I knew what she was asking without her having to say another word. I turned back to Harlan. Fourth, I said. Harlan nodded and turned his gaze back to Deshaun. Fourth and finally, Harlan said, picking up his legal pad, you will complete a full residential financial counseling and rehabilitation program, minimum 18 months, approved by and reported to this office. You will attend every session. You will not miss a single week. You will submit monthly written reports to my office showing your compliance. And upon the program's successful completion, you will present yourself to your parents not for money, not for anything you want from them, but to demonstrate that you have become a man worthy of being called their son. Deshaun was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at me with everything he had left. And if I do all of this, he said, his voice barely holding together. If I sign every paper and I finish the program and I do everything, is there any chance at all? He couldn't finish the sentence. He couldn't bring himself to say what he was actually asking. But I heard it, every syllable of it. Is there any chance you could ever forgive me? I looked at my son for a long time. This man on his knees, this 38-year-old man who had thrown away everything out of weakness and greed and the need to impress people who were never worth impressing. I thought about the boy he had been, the one who used to fall asleep in the back seat of the car on long drives, and I'd carry him inside. The one who made me a clay coffee mug in 3rd grade that I still kept on my desk even now. I thought about all the Sunday dinners and Loretta's pot roast and the peach cobbler Celestine had baked, and the way Deshaun used to eat 3 plates of food and then fall asleep on the couch watching football. I thought about all the versions of him I had loved before this one came along and tried to erase me. And then I thought about the bank, about him sitting across from those board members, telling them I was gone in the mind, telling them I was a danger to myself. I thought about Loretta's face when she first found out, the way the color left it, the way she aged 10 years in 10 seconds. I looked at Harlan. Harlan looked at me. I looked back at Deshaun. There's a chance, I said. There is always a chance. But it won't come from a piece of paper. It won't come from a signed document or a finished program. It will come from time and choices. And it will come, if it comes at all, very, very slowly. Deshaun closed his eyes. 2 more tears tracked down his face. Okay, he said. Okay, Dad. Harlan placed a fresh set of documents on the table, quietly, efficiently, no ceremony. Deshaun pushed himself up off the floor. For the last time, straightened his ruined suit as best he could, and walked to the table. He picked up the pen. He paused for just a second, his hand hovering. Then he signed. Every page, every line. He signed the confession. He signed the divorce papers. He signed the restraining order against Candace and the Langfords. He signed the program enrollment agreement. He signed it all without a word of protest. When he was done, he set the pen down carefully as if it were fragile. He looked at me. He looked at Loretta. "I'm sorry," he said. Not the desperate bargaining kind of sorry he'd been offering for the past hour. Something quieter. Something that had no agenda attached to it. Just the word itself offered with nothing left to lose. Loretta looked at him. Her eyes were wet, but she didn't look away. "We know," she said. That was all. That was everything. Harlan gathered the documents and placed them into the folder beside the original confession. He clicked at his briefcase shut. He looked at me and gave the smallest nod. I nodded back. It was done. We gave you everything. We worked ourselves to the bone. Your father built this legacy, this secret, all to protect you, and you turned around and tried to destroy him. You looked at us, your own flesh and blood, and saw nothing but a weight around your neck. What did we do wrong? What did I do to make you despise us like this? That question cut deeper than any legal maneuver ever could. This was his mother asking him how he had become something so unrecognizable. Deshaun had no answer. He simply fell apart. He buried his face in both hands, and his sobs bounced off the walls of that silent, expensive room. "I don't hate you," he choked out, his voice barely making it through. "I don't. I just what Loretta demanded. What was worth more than us." He lifted his eyes, and the truth, the ugly, wretched truth, finally came spilling out of him. I was ashamed. He cried it out, the words torn from somewhere deep. I was always ashamed. I stopped. Ashamed. Ashamed of what? We gave you a decent roof over your head. We gave you an education. You don't understand. He wept, looking at me. You never understood. I grew up in that modest house. That plain, humble house. I enrolled at a state university while every friend I had headed off to Yale and Harvard. You were an architect, Dad, but you drove a 10-year-old Buick and patched your own roof. Mom, you ran the household, but you clipped coupons and hunted down discount stores. You called it being frugal. You called it honoring hard work. He let out that broken, terrible laugh again. You want to know what my friends called it? They called it poor. They called it cheap. So you were ashamed of us, I said. Not a question. And he kept going as though I hadn't spoken. I met Candace and her family, Clifford Sylvette. They had things, not just money, they had a kind of Polish. They talked about summers out at Kiowa Island, skiing in Gstad clubs I'd never even heard of. They seemed better. They are criminals, Celestine said, speaking up for the first time. I didn't know that then. Deshaun screamed at her. I only knew they were everything I felt I wasn't. I wanted to be one of them. I wanted Candace, and to get her, I had to lie. I told her you were old money. I told her you were just eccentric modest by preference, but secretly sitting on a fortune. He looked at me, then a bitter irony flickering in his eyes. Turns out I wasn't even wrong, you were sitting on a fortune. You just never told me. And the lie kept growing. He went on, his voice dropping to almost nothing. I had to buy her the ring. I took out a loan. I had to take her on trips we had no business taking. Another loan. Then I had to keep the whole thing going. The condo, the car, the dinners, the lifestyle. I thought I could make one big score. Just one. Clear everything out. Live the life I'd been pretending was already mine. But you didn't win, I said. I never won, he whispered. I just kept losing over and over again. So, you came after us? Loretta said, her voice gone flat. When the lies finally ran dry, you came for us. Deshaun nodded, his shoulders caving in under the weight of it. Candace's parents were coming to Dallas. They wanted to see the estate. They wanted to meet the eccentric old couple. I was cornered. The second they laid eyes on the house, the second they met you, it was over. They would see you exactly for what you were. Simple. And you couldn't live with that. I said no, I couldn't. So, the scheme to have me declared incompetent, that was Clifford's idea. He said reaching for something to grab onto. He said it was a standard move for high net worth families, estate planning, to shield assets from erratic decisions. I went along with it. My thinking was, if I could just get my hands on the money, I could make it right before anyone noticed anything was missing. And when that fell apart, I pressed. What was the plan last night, Deshaun? He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the floor. Tell me. It was desperation, he mumbled. Candace and her parents, they said we needed to take control, that you were an obstacle, a burden. They said if we moved in, took charge, made it clear we were calling the shots, you would just give up. You'd stop fighting. Give up. Loretta repeated, horrified. You were trying to break us down. We were going to sell the house, he admitted. Use the proceeds to knock out the immediate debts. Move you and Dad someplace nice, a really high-end facility. We told ourselves you'd be happier there, around people your own age. A facility I said you were going to sell the home I built with my own hands. Use that money to cover your gambling debts and lock us away in a nursing home in the bargain, he stammered. You were ashamed of us, Deshaun. I said it slowly, letting the final cold truth settle over everything. Ashamed of a simple life. So, you decided to steal it, strip it down for parts, and discard us. All to impress a family of criminals and con artists. He had nothing left to say. He just knelt there, the full, ugly, pathetic weight of his choices laid bare. He was a weak man, a gambler, and a liar who had schemed against his own parents out of shame. Deshaun's confession hung in the room like smoke thick and poisonous. He was still on his knees on the floor, a broken 38-year-old man who had just confessed to throwing everything away because he was embarrassed by us. Embarrassed by our love. Loretta, who had been standing over him rigid with a mother's grief, slowly raised her right hand. I could see what was coming. I made no move to stop it. The sound of her open palm meeting his cheek rang out through the high-ceilinged room. It was no gentle reprimand. It was a hard, sharp crack that snapped Deshaun's head sideways. That she said, her voice shaking with a fury I had never once heard from her in 45 years. That is for the tears you made me cry. That is for the terror you put us through. That is for standing in my kitchen and scheming to pack your father and me off to the basement. Deshaun didn't even flinch. He stayed exactly where he was. He'd bowed, the red mark spreading across his cheek. I figured that was it, her final word on the matter. But then she did something that undid me completely. A great shuddering sob broke from her, and she sank down onto the floor in front of him. She pulled his head to her chest and wrapped both arms around him, holding him while he wept. And this, she cried, tears falling into his hair. This is because you are still my son. You are my son, and you are a fool. A terrible, terrible fool, but you are still my son. Deshaun's last defense, whatever thin composure he'd been clinging to, shattered completely. He howled. It was a sound of pure, bottomless grief. He held onto his mother's face pressed into her shoulder, and there they knelt together, two halves of a broken heart, weeping for the family he had just torn apart. Celestine quietly turned her back and moved to the window, giving them a moment. Harlan looked at me. His expression unreadable, but his eyes asked the question plainly. What now, Gerald? I let them cry for a full minute, let the poison run out. But this was not the end. This was only the beginning of the consequences. I walked over to them. Loretta. I said, my voice firm, but not cruel. That's enough. I rested my hand on her shoulder. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Harlan, Celestine, I said. Please, give us a moment. My wife, my son, and me. Harlan nodded. He and Celestine rose quickly and quietly and stepped out of the conference room, pulling the heavy door shut behind them, leaving the three of us alone. I looked at Deshaun still on his knees and at Loretta sitting on the floor beside him. Get up, Deshaun, I said. The word came out like a command. He sniffled, dragging his sleeve across his nose, his expensive rumpled suit making him look like nothing so much as a scolded child. He slowly, painfully pushed himself upright. He stood before me, head bowed, shoulders collapsed. You have two paths, I told him, my voice cold and hard as a closed door. Listen to me carefully. Harlan and I have put together a file. It holds the bank records, the testimony from the bank manager, the audio recordings of your Plan B conversation, and the signed confessions from you and your criminal in-laws. It is enough to put you, Candace, and both her parents behind bars for a very long time. That is path A. You and I and your mother, we never speak again. Deshaun's eyes went wide with raw terror. Dad, no. You said there were conditions. I did, I told him, and that is path B. You will stay out of prison, Deshaun. I won't be the one bringing criminal charges against you, but you will pay for what you've done. You will pay in a way that finally reaches you, that finally makes you understand. And these conditions are not up for debate. You will agree to every last one of them, right here, right now, or I will call Harlan back in and he will walk that file directly to the district attorney. Are we clear? Yes. Yes, Dad. Clear, he said, nodding rapidly, eyes wild with desperation. Anything. I'll agree to anything. Good. I began to pace. First treatment, not just a weekly session with a therapist. You are a gambler. That's an addiction, not a habit. You will enter a 30-day inpatient program, and when that's done, you will attend outpatient meetings for however long the doctor says you need them. Are we clear? Yes, Dad. Second, you will get a job, I don't care what it is. Sweep floors, flip burgers, drive a truck. You will earn a paycheck with your own two hands. And out of every one of those paychecks, you will begin paying back the $750,000 you stole, not from me, from the trust, with interest. Not $1 will come to you from me, from your mother, or from that trust. Your inheritance is gone, permanently. Are we clear? He swallowed hard. The full weight of it was landing a lifetime of working-class labor, of clocking in and paying down a debt that would follow him for years. But then he looked at me, and he thought about the prison door waiting just behind option A, and he nodded. Yes, I understand, I will. Third, the Langfords. Candace, her whole family. You are finished with them. Harlan is drawing up the divorce papers as we speak. You will sign them. You will file a permanent 500-mile restraining order against all three of them. You will never see them, speak to them, or reach out to them in any form for the rest of your life. They are poison to Sean. They poisoned you, and you let it happen. That ends today. Are we clear? He didn't pause. Yes, clear. It's over, I know. Good, I said. I stopped moving and planted myself in front of him. And fourth, you will accept your punishment. Deshaun looked up at me, fear filling his eyes. Punishment, I said. The job, the debt, that's not punishment, son. That's just what a grown man does. That's just mopping up your own mess. No, I'm talking about a real punishment, a true consequence, a daily reminder of what you did, of who you were prepared to become. What he whispered. What is it? I let the silence breathe for a moment. I glanced at Loretta. She gave me a slow nod, her face still tracked with tears, but her eyes were set. She was with me. You're going to come home, I said. The relief that washed over Deshaun's face was so total, he nearly buckled. Home! Oh, Dad, thank you, thank you. Don't thank me yet. I cut him off. You are not coming home as our son. You are coming home as our tenant. Celestine is the new owner of this property. She will be your landlady. I can pay rent, he stammered. With my new job? Oh, you'll pay rent, I said, but not in money, you'll pay it in sweat. You are going to live in the basement. His face went still. The basement? The guest room, the one in the basement, the very room you and your wife so generously picked out for me and your mother, that will be your new home. It's comfortable, it's convenient, it's right next to the laundry room. And as you yourself were so quick to point out, one person doesn't really need that much space. You will live there, and in place of rent, you will serve as the property's live-in handyman. You will fix the roof, Deshaun, you'll clear the drains, paint the fences, cut the grass. You will learn firsthand with your own hands exactly what it takes to keep up the very house you were so eager to steal and sell from under us. You will do that every single day until you have paid what you owe, not just to the trust, but to this family. Do you accept these conditions? He stood there and let it settle over him, the humiliation, the ruin, the full distance of his fall. He had gone from a $35 million heir to a broke, divorced gambling addict, sentenced to live in his parents' basement as a handyman. It was exactly as I had intended, a fate worse than prison. It was justice. He looked at his mother. He looked at me. And then he gave one slow, defeated nod. Yes, Dad, he whispered. I accept. 1 month later, the house at 312 Sycamore Bend was a different place entirely. It was lighter. The thick, suffocating dread that had pressed down on our lives for the last several years had lifted, replaced by something I hadn't known. I was missing the sounds of a home that was actually alive. Celestine and her husband Kwame, a steady, warm-hearted man who taught high school physics, had moved in 2 weeks after that day at Harlan's office. They settled into the 2 guest rooms on the 2nd floor. Celestine, it turned out, was 6 months pregnant, something she'd been too afraid to share with anyone in the middle of all the family turmoil. The moment Loretta found out, she became a different woman, The haunted, betrayed person who had walked out of Harlan's office simply vanished, and the mother I had spent 45 years beside came back. Her grief over Deshawn's betrayal found a new fierce outlet getting that house ready for her grandnephew. The rooms that had been so quiet for so long now rang with the sound of Loretta and Celestine laughing together in the kitchen, bickering over nursery paint colors and baking. Lord, I had missed the smell of Loretta's baking. She hadn't done it for pleasure in years. Now every corner of the house carried cinnamon, vanilla, and apple pie. Loretta and I were back in our master bedroom, our sanctuary. Life was finding a new rhythm, a better one. Celestine and Kwame insisted on covering the groceries. Kwame, it turned out, had a real gift for gardening and spent his weekends wrestling the backyard back from the weeds. We were a family, not the one I had originally pictured, but a genuine one. And then there was Deshawn. Deshawn lived in the basement. He had come back from his 30-day inpatient gambling program just last week. He was thinner. The arrogance that had lived in his face for so long was gone scraped clean, leaving a hollow-eyed, quiet stranger I almost didn't recognize. But he had kept his word. He had found a job. He was stocking shelves and mixing paint at the local True Value hardware store. Every evening at exactly 6:15, I'd hear the side door open and close. I'd watch through the kitchen window as my son, my 38-year-old son, crossed the yard and disappeared into the basement entrance. He was no longer the man in the sharp suit. He came home coated in a fine layer of drywall dust, hair matted down with sweat, fingernails permanently stained with grease and paint. He looked worn out. He looked hollowed out. But he also looked real. He didn't join us for dinner. That was part of the arrangement. His meals were his own to figure out. He ate alone in the basement room. He was a tenant, a handyman. He was serving his sentence. I didn't speak to him, and he didn't speak to me. We occupied the same house as two entirely separate worlds. Loretta would look at me from across the room, her eyes asking, pleading for me to say something, to offer him some small grace. I held firm. This was not something a simple "I'm sorry" could touch. This was a debt that had to be paid out in full, in sweat, in humility, and in time. That evening I was alone in the kitchen while Loretta and Celestine were upstairs. I had just poured myself a glass of water when I heard it. Drip, 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 coming from the kitchen sink. A steady, nagging, persistent leak from the faucet I'd put in myself 15 years ago. I sighed. I looked at the drip, then I looked at the clock. 6:13 p.m. I waited. At 6:15 on the dot, the side door opened. I watched Deshawn pass by the window, head low shoulders, dropped lunchbox in hand. I dried my hands and walked to the basement door. I pulled it open and headed down the stairs. The room was clean, spare. A single bed made up neatly a small desk, a hot plate sitting in the corner. Deshawn was standing in the middle of the floor, just working off his heavy paint-stained boots. He froze the moment he saw me, like a startled animal. "Dad," he said. His voice was hoarse. "The faucet," I said, flat and businesslike. "The one in the kitchen. It's leaking. The seal's probably worn through. I need you to fix it." Deshawn just looked at me for a moment. A flicker of the old version of him flared in his eyes, the marketing director, who didn't fix things, the man who paid other people to deal with problems. I held his gaze without blinking. The flicker died. He looked down at his dirty hands. "Okay," he said quietly. I'll need to stop by the store tomorrow, pick up a new O-ring set for that model." "Fine," I said. "See that you do. Celestine needs the kitchen for dinner." I turned to leave. I was halfway up the stairs when I stopped. I didn't turn around. "Your mother?" I said, my back still to him. "She made that chicken cacciatore you like. There's a plate set aside for you on the stove." I heard a sharp breath from the room below. I waited. Then came a small, choked sound. "Thank you," he whispered. His voice was thick. "Please tell her, thank you." I stood there a moment longer, my hand on the railing. I was nowhere near ready to forgive him, not even close, but I knew what I was witnessing. "You're paying your rent, Deshawn," I said, still not turning around. "You're getting your hands dirty. You're doing it yourself." I paused, and the last words came out weighted with everything we had lost, and everything that was still raw and broken. "For the first time in your life, you're doing it on your own." I climbed the rest of the stairs and pulled the door shut, leaving him alone in the basement with his tools and the dinner his mother had kept warm for him. The phone rang 2 weeks later. It was Harlan. His voice was crisp and efficient, carrying a note of finality. "Gerald," he said, "I wanted to give you the closing update on the Langford side of things. It's officially done. I was at my kitchen table working through a cup of coffee. Through the window I could see Loretta and Celestine out back on the porch swing, deep in conversation about the baby coming. "What happened, Harlan?" I asked, keeping my voice even. "Clifford Langford. Harlan was taken into custody by federal agents about an hour ago, right on the 9th hole of his golf club." I closed my eyes. Justice. The SEC investigation we'd surfaced was the final nail Harlan went on. He wasn't just dipping into client funds, Gerald. The man was running a full-scale Ponzi scheme. He's looking at 20 years minimum. He isn't coming out. I thought of that arrogant, dismissive man who had laughed in my face and told me I was irrelevant. A man who measured everyone by their balance sheet and whose own, it turned out, was built entirely on air. "And Sylvette?" I asked. "Completely wiped out," Harlan said, and there was a grim satisfaction threading through his voice. "Every account she held was tied to his fraudulent operation. The house has been seized by the feds. The cars are gone. According to my investigator, she's currently staying at a Super 8. She's functionally bankrupt." "It gets worse," Harlan added. "She actually had the nerve to contact my office and demand that the Whitfield Trust cover her legal fees. Claimed she was a victim of my aggressive tactics." "What did you do?" "I sent her a bill," Harlan said flatly, "for the emotional distress she caused my clients, Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Whitfield. She won't be calling again. The Langfords. Gerald, they're finished, socially, financially, legally. They flew too close to the sun. A quiet sense of order settled over me. Not joy, just completion. And the daughter I asked. I couldn't bring myself to say her name. "Ah, Candace. She's been busy," Harlan said. "How so?" "She filed for divorce right away, exactly as she'd threatened. Her attorney, a real predator out of a downtown firm, filed a motion to seize all of Deshawn's assets as emergency alimony. Even after everything, she was still convinced the $35 million was tucked away somewhere, that we were running some elaborate bluff." "What happened?" I asked, though I already had a feeling. Harlan actually chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. It was anticlimactic. "We had Deshawn submit his last 3 pay stubs from the True Value hardware store. We provided a notarized copy of his basement lease agreement. We showed his bank account, which currently carries a balance of 212.48. I let myself picture Candace's face at that moment. Her attorney, Harlan said, with deep satisfaction, withdrew from the case this morning. Cited non-payment of fees. It seems Candace couldn't afford her own shark. She has no job, no marketable skills, and her parents' credit cards are nothing but useless plastic now. She gets nothing. So, she walks away with nothing. She walks away with exactly what she brought into this family," Harlan confirmed. "A bad attitude and a closet full of expensive out-of-style clothes." A pause settled between us. "Don't waste too much sympathy on her, though," Harlan added. "My investigator did one final follow-up strictly out of professional curiosity. She's already back on the circuit. She was spotted last night at a gala at the art museum, working her way toward an 87-year-old real estate mogul. She's hunting for her next target." I shook my head slowly, a small, bitter smile finding its way to my face. "Some people never learn, Harlan." "No, Jerry," he replied. "They don't, but we do. And Deshawn is learning. That, I think, is what counts." His words hung there in the air a moment, so Harlan said, his voice going softer. "All business concluded. That's the end of it. The Langfords are gone. Candace is gone. Deshawn is paying his dues. The only question left is, are you happy? Gerald, after all of this, was it worth it?" I didn't answer right away. I let my eyes drift back to the window. Loretta and Celestine were still on the porch swing laughing. Out in the yard, I could see Kwame Celestine's husband standing next to our old stubborn riding lawnmower, and right beside him was Deshawn. He was covered in grease. His hands were black. He had the engine cover up, and the two of them were bent over it peering inside. Kwame was pointing at something. Deshawn listened. He nodded. He wasn't the polished marketing director. He wasn't the arrogant, defeated son. He was just a man figuring out how to fix something. He was learning to do the work I had always done. I watched as Deshawn finally grabbed the starter cord and pulled. The engine sputtered, caught, and roared to life. He climbed up onto the seat, engaged the gear, and slowly, carefully made the first clean pass across the grass. I brought the phone back to my ear. "Happy is a complicated word, Harlan," I said. "I'm not happy that my son is a broken man. I'm not happy that tearing his life apart was the only way to salvage it. But," Harlan prompted gently. "But," I said, my voice thick with it, I look out this window and I see my wife smiling in a way I haven't seen in years. I see my niece, who has been more of a daughter to me than my son ever managed, safe and settled in my home. I hear laughter in these rooms again. I watch Deshaun make another slow pass on that mower, his face set with concentration. And what I see out there on the lawn, I finished as a man who might one day be worth something. I'm not happy, Harlan, but I'm at peace. And for the first time in a very long time, I feel myself getting there, getting closer, thanks to you. That's all I needed to hear. Gerald, look after that family. I will, I said, the real one. I set down the phone. 6 months had gone by since that day in Harlan's office. 6 months since the old poison structure of my family had come apart. Winter had arrived and passed, and now a cool spring evening was easing itself over the house. Sunday dinner at 312 Sycamore Bend had once been a performance, a stiff-strained affair, where Loretta and I pretended, and Deshaun and Candace pretended right back, all of us gagging on unspoken resentments and half-truths. But this was something else entirely. The table was set for 5. The air in the dining room wasn't heavy. It was easy. It carried the smell of Loretta's pot roast and the peach cobbler Celestine had baked. Quam, Celestine's husband, was in the middle of a story about a student in his physics class who had tried to argue that gravity was a matter of personal preference. Loretta was laughing a full, real laugh I hadn't heard from her in years. She and Celestine sat close together. Celestine was 8 months along now, glowing with it, and Loretta hovered over her constantly. Her grief over Deshaun's betrayal poured into this new, fierce purpose. "I'm telling you, Loretta Gray is too sophisticated," Celestine said, gesturing with her fork. "Nonsense," Loretta countered, her eyes bright. "Gray is calming. We add accents. Yellow ducks. It will be beautiful. We don't want to overstimulate the baby, do we?" They looked happy. My wife, who had been a ghost drifting through her own home, was alive again. She had something to live toward. She was going to be a grandmother in everything but blood. And at the far end of the table, sitting in the chair that Clifford Langford had once tried to claim as his own, was Deshaun. He was quiet. He ate with his eyes on his plate. He had spent 6 months in the basement now, and 5 of those working at the hardware store. He looked different. The arrogance was completely gone, worn away, leaving behind a hollow-eyed, subdued man. His hands told the whole story. They were no longer the soft hands of a marketing director. They were rough. The knuckles were calloused, the fingernails clean, but permanently darkened around the edges. These were the hands of a man who worked for his living. He didn't sit down with us every night, but Sunday was turning into something of a ritual. It was Celestine who had pushed for it. "He's part of this household, Uncle Gerald. He does the work. He ought to eat with the family." He sat and listened. He didn't cut in. He didn't preen. He didn't put on any kind of show. He was simply present, Deshaun Kwame said, drawing him into the conversation. "That job you did on the attic insulation. Remarkable. Our room is a full 10-degree warmer." Deshaun glanced up, caught off guard by the attention. "Oh, it was just some fiberglass batting. The old material had been compressed down to nothing. I spotted a draft coming off the north-facing eave. Well, whatever you did," Celestine smiled over at him, "it made a difference. Thank you." Deshaun gave a short nod, a faint flush creeping up the back of his neck. "You're welcome." He turned his attention back to his food. He wasn't holding court. He wasn't the heir apparent. He was just the man who occupied the basement, the man who fixed things. And for the first time, it seemed like that was enough for him. After dinner, Loretta and Celestine began gathering the plates, bickering cheerfully over who got the last slice of cake. Kwame headed upstairs to read. I did what I always do. I went out to the front porch. The air was cool and crisp, carrying the scent of spring lilacs. I settled into my old rocking chair, the one my own father had built with his hands, and looked out at the quiet street. 312 Sycamore Bend. It was my house again. I heard the screen door creak open and swing shut behind me. It was Deshaun. He lingered by the door, shifting his weight, his hands fidgeting inside the pockets of his clean jeans. He looked like a man who didn't quite know where to put himself. "Dad," he said, his voice low. "Deshaun," I answered without turning. I kept right on rocking. He came and stood in front of me, stepping into my line of sight. He looked smaller, not beaten down, exactly just human. Can I have a minute? I'm listening." He drew a slow breath. His roughened hands trembled just slightly as he pulled them free of his pockets. In his right hand, he was holding 2 envelopes. Plain white business envelopes, a little crumpled at the corners. This, this is the first one, he said, extending the thicker envelope toward me. It's the rent for the basement room. I'm 2 days late. I'm sorry. My paycheck didn't post until this afternoon. I studied him. Then I studied the envelope. His rent as I had laid out was his labor, his sweat on the house. This felt like something different. What is this, I asked. Celestine and Kwame, he said, stumbling over the words not quite meeting my gaze. They've got a baby coming. What I do around the house, that's fine for the property, but they need real money, for diapers, for things. It's my paycheck from the hardware store, all of it. This whole month, it's 512. Please pass it along to Celestine. Tell her it's for the baby. I held the envelope in my hand. 512. The man who had burned through $500,000 was standing before me, offering up every dollar he had earned. All right, I said, and set it on the small table beside my chair. I'll see she gets it. And he said, his voice dropping lower. He held out the second envelope. This one was thin, almost nothing. This is the other thing. I took it. It was light as a leaf. It's not much, he said, and the shame in his voice was different from anything I'd heard from him before. This wasn't the shame of a man embarrassed by his origins. This was the shame of a debtor trying to make something right. It's $100. It's everything I could save after everything else. But it's the first one. I frowned. The first what? The first payment, he said, and this time he held my eyes toward the $750,000. I know it's barely a drop. I know it'll take forever, but it's a start. $100. I'll have another 100 next month, maybe more, if there's overtime. He stood there wide open, offering this small and staggering thing. I turned the little envelope over in my hands. $100 against a debt of $750,000. By every measure, it was nothing. It was almost laughable. And at the same time, it was the most meaningful payment I had ever held. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked up at my son. You're right, I said, my voice going thick. It's not much. At this rate, it will take you more than 600 years to clear this debt to Sean. He winced, but he didn't drop his gaze. He didn't reach for an excuse. He just stood there and let the truth land. I know, sir, he whispered. I slowly, deliberately tucked the envelope with the $100 into the breast pocket of my shirt right over my heart. All right, I said, pressing my hand flat against the pocket. One payment down, a long road ahead. A single tear broke loose and tracked down his cheek. He scrubbed it away with the back of his rough hand, almost irritated by it. Yes, sir. He stood there a moment longer. The kitchen faucet, he said. I fixed it. It won't give you any more trouble. Good, I replied. That's good work. He nodded slowly as though those 3 words were the finest thing anyone had said to him in years. Good night, Dad. Good night, son. He turned and walked back toward the basement door, his shoulders held straight. I sat on that porch for a long time, rocking in my father's old chair. Through the walls, I could hear the faint sound of Loretta and Celestine laughing as they washed up the dishes. Beyond that, the distant hum of the city. The cool spring air moved across my face. Harlan had asked me whether I was happy. No, happy wasn't the right word. Too easy, too clean for what this was. I had lost my son, the brilliant, arrogant, weak, dishonest marketing director. That version of him was gone, and he wasn't coming back. I had been the one who had to take him apart. But sitting there in the dark, with my hand resting on my chest and that small, crinkled envelope pressed beneath my palm, I understood something. In the rubble of all of it, I had found something I hadn't expected. I had found a man who was meeting his debts, a man who repaired what he had broken, a man learning the hard and unglamorous way what it actually means to build a life, rather than simply purchase the appearance of one. I had lost the son I believed I wanted, but I had finally found the man I had always needed him to become. I closed my eyes. The house was quiet. The war was finished. And for the first time in my 69 years, my world was at last truly in order. If you've stayed with me this far, then you already know this was never really a story about money. It was a story about what shame can do to a person when they let it drive long enough. Gerald Whitfield spent 40 years building something quietly, patiently, without applause. He drove a modest car. He fixed his own roof. He clipped no coupons for himself, but he saved everything for a son who never once asked why. And when that son turned against him, Gerald didn't collapse. He responded with preparation, with patience, and with the kind of justice that doesn't need to raise its voice. I believe God has a way of honoring the people who build in silence and exposing the ones who tear down in secret. The Lord's timing on that isn't always what we expect, but it is always exact. Here is what this family revenge story taught me, and what I hope it leaves with you. First, never let shame about where you come from push you toward a life you have to lie to maintain. The debt that follows will cost far more than the embarrassment ever would have. Second, if you are going to protect what you have built, document everything. A prepared man is not a paranoid man. He is a wise one. Third, real punishment is not always a prison cell. Sometimes it is handing a person exactly the life they were too proud to live and making them live it honestly. Fourth, for those of us in the adults and +, season of life, do not assume that your age makes you an easy target. Experience is not weakness. It is the longest preparation you will ever have. If this story moved, you share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Leave your thoughts in the comments. I read them, and they mean more than you know. And if you haven't yet subscribed to Honor Revenge Stories so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for spending this time with me. Take care of yourselves and take care of each other. Until next time.